no, you can't stop me from talking about astrology, but I'm just like, I'm getting Virgo Capricorn vibes from Phoebe.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our last episode, at least for now, of The Budget Fix. We've been diving into real people's budgets and offering our best suggestions, and I am joined once again by my fabulous co-host, Berna Anat. Hello, Berna.
Hi, Holly. Great to come back here. Sad that this is the last one for now, but excited to get nosy once again.
Absolutely. So we're just going to dive right into this one. I think that, if you want a little bit more background on what we're doing here, definitely check out the first 2 episodes of this series. But basically, we are just diving into real people's budgets and offering tweaks and suggestions based on what we would do in their situation. Also, just your regular disclaimer that this is just for educational and entertainment purposes and does not constitute financial advice. And you should always consult a certified financial professional for your individual circumstances. Okay, so our last budgeter looks quite a bit different than our first 2 budgeters. We're going to call her Phoebe. Phoebe is 31 years old, living in an urban area in the Midwest. She is currently making $64,000 a year from her full-time job and also makes about $5,000 a year from freelancing. A very interesting thing about Phoebe is her mortgage is already fully paid off. She spent a while living on just 30% of her income to pay that off as quickly as possible. And she currently has an emergency fund balance of over $10,000. I love Phoebe. I'm obsessed with Phoebe's response. When in the form it says biggest budget issue, she just said none.
Period.
What are your thoughts on Phoebe so far?
Obsessed. First of all, this is a situation in which if Phoebe is living in an urban area in the Midwest, a full-time job, $64K, freelance $5K, mortgage paid off, emergency fund padded, I'm like, what am I doing wrong with my life? And that I'm not 31, I'm a little older, but like it would have been a very uphill climb to get to where Phoebe is, where she's at now. Because of course I've chosen to live in not the Midwest and lots of other lifestyle choices. So I'm psyched for Phoebe that 2 of the things that really kind of plague a lot of folks in terms of budget is like massive debt and having no emergency fund. And so Phoebe's telling the truth where it's like, do you have a budgeting issue? She was like, no. Love. There's still things to fix. It is called the budget fix, but the energy is perfect.
Absolutely. I think that we're going to see with Phoebe, the word budget is definitely restriction for her. Here's what she put as her biggest current financial struggle. I prioritize things like saving, investing, and paying for needs so much that I struggle to pay for wants. While I was paying off my mortgage, I lived on 30% of my take-home pay and put the rest to paying off my home. I'm not so extreme now, but I still struggle to spend money on things I absolutely don't need. So we already talked about the scarcity mindset in a different context. Are you seeing a different side of the scarcity mindset here?
Yes, absolutely. I think when it comes to having a certain kind of childhood, and we'll get into a little bit of Phoebe's childhood in a bit, but when I hear things like I struggle to pay for my wants, I was really good at really just siphoning down and living really tightly. I was really good at living in the extremes of financial discipline. I hear that there's probably some sort of background where they're reacting to maybe something that was the opposite, or they were taught to be that frugal as well. And there's a tightness, there's a clenching, and it's very familiar to me. And I'm wondering how we can get someone like Phoebe to open up and loosen up, because what we know so far, no mortgage, emergency fund looking good. I'm like, there's definitely there. I'm hoping that there is room to open up here, and we'll learn more about Phoebe and what is making her feel like she doesn't have permission to lean into the things that she wants.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there with the childhood lingering effects. Phoebe does say for her family background, she has divorced parents and grew up in poverty living with addicts. Her mother did not consistently work and relied on her disability payments and child support to pay their bills. Debt often went to collections and bills often went unpaid. That sounds like a really unstable foundation to me.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like could be chaotic, probably feeling unsafe for Phoebe a lot of the time, and unsafe when she was very young. I'm seeing that mom relied on Phoebe's disability payments and child support to pay our bills. And so Phoebe was, I'm going to use a sort of very therapy word, reminding y'all that I am not licensed in therapy or mental health at all. I am just been in therapy for a lot of years, and I love the digging part of this. But it sounds like she had to basically be parentified at a very young age. She had to step up and be kind of a breadwinner to a certain degree when she was so young. And it's not necessarily, it doesn't sound like Phoebe was going out and like hitting the streets and working. The money that was coming in as disability payments and child support for Phoebe became how the household was supported. That is a very heavy thing to deal with very young. Debt went to collections, bills went unpaid. It sounds really chaotic. And so it doesn't surprise me that Phoebe is now in a place where she's like, I'm stable. I'm stable as hell. I'm gonna have stability right now. She's probably reaching for and like clinging to anything that feels like stability and like normalness. Because to be in that chaotic place for so long, so young, we see a lot of this in the finance world where people are like, you will never ever find me back there again. I'm gonna do everything I can and maybe even overcorrect a ton to the point where I don't know how to have fun. I don't know how to let loose. Couldn't blame Phoebe at all for it, but I'm hoping we can find some spaces for her to breathe here.
Absolutely. And Phoebe did give us a lot of information on her financial background, but I think it's super relevant. So I'm going to go ahead and go into her why first. She says, I'm physically disabled and I have always worried about my future. I do not want others to have to help me. Disabled people are all too often unemployed or underemployed. I have expenses that many people don't have, like a $10,000 wheelchair, for example. So I have to be smart with money. I am conscious that many people are just one disaster away from poverty, and I am very vulnerable. Also, I have no idea what to expect as I age, what my needs might be later in life, or what my resources will be available to me. So I must do whatever I can now to set myself up for the future. Honestly, I know that obviously Phoebe has a different set of circumstances being disabled, but Berna, this comes a lot back to what we were already talking about in terms of this current administration and financial changes that we're already seeing that we talked about last episode.
Yeah, absolutely. It's wild because in doing just like a tiny bit of research, because I'm not a disability expert or expert in terms of finances for folks with disabilities, but I know to a degree that to set up security and enoughness as a person with disabilities, the systems that exist already F you in every way. It's not supportive in terms of social services for folks with disabilities, and it's really not supportive in terms of your finance life. We'll talk a little bit about it more as we get into suggestions, but I know that there is some real backwards shizzle going on when it comes to wanting to set up support and stability for yourself in terms of like what assets you could have as a disabled person and how that counts against you for trying to get other resources. And I am not imagining that this current administration is going to open that up and make it easier for folks with disabilities. So I think Phoebe is very right and valid in wanting to kind of utilize a little bit of that, like, I got to clench energy because it's not looking lovely really for in terms of this administration, and it never really was for disabled people to like set themselves up for financial success. So we'll definitely have to do some work here.
Absolutely. And just to give a little bit more financial background on Phoebe, she's already had some experience seeing these disability benefits not pan out the way they really should. She says, previously, I earned less money and I qualified for Social Security disability insurance payments for a while. Sometime later, the SSA retroactively determined they'd overpaid me, so I am now paying them back. It is interest free. I know. It is interest free, and I pay a minimum of $200 a month per the terms of the payment plan. Disabled and proud, but help from the SSA can sometimes be more trouble than it's worth, TBH, upside down smiley face. As Berna said about herself, I'm also not a disability expert, so I did sit down with a disability finance expert to get a little bit more insight into what the financial picture looks like for people like Phoebe.
Hello, everyone. I am here at the TFD office, and I am speaking with Darcy Milburn, the Director of Social Security and Healthcare Policy with the ARC of the United States. Thank you so much for joining me, Darcy. And can you just give a little overview of what you do and what the ARC does?
Sure, yeah. So I help advise the ARC and all of its chapters on Social Security policy from the federal level and also on healthcare policy from the federal level. In terms of the programs that I cover, I do a lot of work on Social Security disability insurance, SSDI, and supplemental security income, SSI.
How can someone plan ahead if they know that they're going to have to take time off work or even quit work at some point in the future due to disability or chronic illness, but they don't know exactly when that'll be, and it could be years from now?
Yeah, so first I have to say, like, The general advice that I remember growing up and that is told by various financial experts to people is to try to have 3 to 6 months of living expenses saved away in an emergency fund for just in case you need it at some point in time. Something that a lot of people don't know is that that is not possible for a lot of people with disabilities by law in some cases. So the answer to your question kind of depends on the person's disability status according to the Social Security Administration, which benefits they might be eligible for, and other things like that. If somebody is eligible for SSI, that's supplemental security income, that involves having a medically qualified disability and also having very, very low income and assets. If that person gets monthly SSI benefits, they're actually not allowed to have more than $2,000 in total financial resources at any time. So it's kind of ridiculous for folks to say, "Oh, just make sure you have an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months," when the government says you're not allowed to have more than $2,000. Advice for somebody like that, and I have to say this is another like corollary to that. This is only available for people whose disabilities began before the age of 26, is ABLE accounts. And ABLE accounts are one of the things that I wish more people knew about. There's only a few 100,000 people in the US that actually have an ABLE account, and so many more that are eligible for an ABLE account, but either are intimidated by setting one up or just don't know about it. It's a tax advantage savings account for people with disabilities that exempts everything in that account from the SSI asset limit, from Medicaid asset limits, and from other things that can restrict your eligibility for disability benefits. So that's SSI. For SSDI, there is no asset limit. In terms of somebody who is planning that they're going to need to be out of work at some point, it depends on their health condition. There are some health conditions that the Social Security Administration allows you to have an expedited access to SSI or SSDI benefits. And there's a long list of various conditions that applies to.
If someone does have the resources currently to save up a big nest egg, do you think it's worth doing that, even if it means that they won't be eligible for as many or the same types of SSI benefits in the future?
Absolutely. I've talked to lots of people who are SSI beneficiaries, and one of the things they tell me over and over again is that if I didn't absolutely need this benefit, I would not be part of this program because the income and asset restrictions and various other reporting requirements for SSI are really burdensome. And so if you are able to save, and if you are eligible for an ABLE account, ABLE accounts are good for people who don't even need SSI as well, because they have some benefits that other savings accounts don't have. So definitely still look into an ABLE account, and definitely makes sense to try and have an emergency nest egg set away.
Absolutely. And I did speak to a few financial planners when I was prepping for this video, and they recommend someone in this situation, instead of just the 3 to 6 months emergency fund, definitely have more like 12 to 24 months.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. I just don't know a whole lot of people who can swing that right now. And people should know that if you can do a little bit less, that's better than nothing as well.
And then a little bit more information on Phoebe's circumstances. She is single, happily child-free, and just has pets. She occasionally utilizes interest-free debt options like PayPal credit, but she pays it off before interest hits. Interest infuriates me, she says. I owe a balance to PayPal credit for a few purchases that qualify for 6 months of no interest. I do not owe interest as I have paid each purchase off within the interest-free period. My plan is to pay $300 to $400 a month until the balance is paid off. She also says service is really important to her. She volunteers with local nonprofit orgs and tries to donate some amount of money every month. She also pays insurances once or twice a year, so she has a sinking fund for those. I love this. We don't have to tell Phoebe what a sinking fund is. She's already very on top of a lot of stuff. She also says health insurance she has, and it's just deducted from her paycheck, so she doesn't have it listed in her budget. Before we segue into our tiered recommendations for Phoebe, I'm reading fire here. What are your readings on Phoebe's situation? She's currently putting $600 a month into her emergency fund, as well as about $6,000 a year into her IRA. I do think, she might want to look at adjusting that just because the limit is higher than it used to be. But, she's doing pretty well on that front, which is kind of a lot of money. And if you look at her budget, I did put it into a budget template like I did for the other budgeters. It looks like her necessary expenses come out to $600 a month. And if you take into account her other like discretionary spending, that we're looking at, $1,300 a month, $1,400 a month that she's spending. So $10,000 plus in an emergency fund means she is pretty much covered for like 10 months of expenses, not including, her emergency fund contributions and her Roth IRA or whatever, but definitely like in a good position.
One thing I love that you did, Holly, in the last episode is that we had like a moment to be like, hey, Dawn, you good. Like, understand that you not having, having accomplished these certain things, that's an amazing thing. I would love to have that moment here for Phoebe too, of just like, dang, Phoebe, you did the thing. There's a lot to say here about like maybe this being a reaction to the very intense childhood, but like financially in terms of numbers, she's in a very secure place, though understanding that she's looking into a future that can feel very unsecure. I hope though that it's important for all of us to take the moment, especially when you've come from really intense backgrounds, to be like, I did that. I broke a cycle. I am doing well for myself. I found stability for myself. We've been running in that direction for so long, so it's hard to stop ourselves, but I hope Phoebe takes a moment to pause. 10 months of expenses is incredible. And we're thinking, right, like in terms of considering her for fire, can we refunnel some of this like discretionary fund, this extra money into a brokerage account? I'm imagining Phoebe being, I know you can't stop me from talking about astrology, but I'm just like, I'm getting Virgo Capricorn vibes from Phoebe, and imagining what that means is she's thought about what needs to be in her emergency fund. She's thought about how many months of expenses she needs. I'm wondering, I'm like, 10 months is a pretty healthy number of months to cover yourself. Now, not knowing what Phoebe's situation is in terms of her disability and what she might need, what it might mean for her if she ends up losing her job and what it means to try to get another one. I'm wondering if 10 months is her actual secure number. If there's a moment to reevaluate and actually she might feel better with like 6 or 7, we can refunnel some of that cash as well into like a brokerage account or a fire situation. Sometimes I do side eye fire movement a little bit because as it's sold to us in the sort of like, come to the fireside, we have cookies. It tends to be like a lot of hyper hoarding, like aggressive investments. And I already feel a little strange about, a lot of us feel a little strange about investing more into like the S&P and our typical like index funds because of what they fund. But I do like the idea of her funneling more of her discretionary funds into opening a brokerage for higher savings. I want to know, and I'm would love to hear this from a disability finances expert too. What are the tangible needs in the future that's different for folks who aren't thinking about disability right now? What are those tangible needs that she needs to save for? And can we put all that sort of extra fire hose money, not fire hose, not a pun, but like hose of money towards those needs? And alongside that, I would love for Phoebe to be retired early. She's worked so damn hard up until this point. Like, fire doesn't have to mean like Phoebe gets to retire in 5 years. Fire can also mean we're leveraging investments so that she can feel a little more flexibility and stability for herself.
To me, for Phoebe, the question is not like really honestly even saving more, because she is putting away so much money a month. It's just maybe rethinking where it's going. I'm obviously not a financial planner, so I can't tell her that exactly, but I do think, maybe once she hits some amount of money in an emergency fund, and maybe Phoebe would feel better at having 12 months or 2 years just in a savings account because of her vulnerability. But, there's got to be some number where, okay, now it would make more sense for this money to have more opportunity to grow. So I definitely think, she's set up herself really well in terms of her habits, but maybe there's some different places we could start directing those. There are some disability finance resources out there. There is a website for the National Disability Institute that gives inclusive financial counseling, which is something to really consider.
Something I would emphasize for people who are needing to apply for disability benefits at all is that the waiting time for disability benefits is absolutely excruciating. It can take as much as 8 months for someone to get through just the first round of the disability application process. And then if they get rejected and have to appeal, that can be another 2 years. So I would just very much caution and let people know long in advance that it can take a really long time to get through the process to get SSDI benefits. And also, your benefits are calculated based on the date you apply. So it's good to try and apply much sooner rather than later. The other tip I would just recommend is having a lawyer to help you apply can help speed things up. But I also understand completely that that is outside of the means of a lot of people.
I'm happy for Phoebe that she is setting herself up really well. She owns her home. She has some really good financial habits in place and definitely is prioritizing the right things. But it's just like there are plenty of people like Phoebe in the world who are not able to be in that position, and that's really shit.
It's awful. I think I'm really glad you're sort of plugging the inclusive financial counseling here, because my hope for Phoebe is that she finds someone who is a financial advisor that can point her towards resources that do help. Because it's, as a person with disabilities, you're fighting an uphill battle financially for sure. It's not a matter of like, let's find the resources that help you. It's like, let's try to undo and like catch up, because in the financial world, you're not really being given any kind of true support. I mean, I saw a disability expert and activist that I follow recently be like, none of us are going to leave this life fully able-bodied. Everyone's going to become disabled at some point. That kind of age limit is just points exactly to the effery of it all. So, well, we can go on about how angry things will make us, but Phoebe needs support.
The eligibility age for ABLE accounts is actually increasing next year in 2026. People whose disabilities develop before the age of 46 are eligible, so that will open it up to a lot more people. Sadly, I don't think that there are nearly enough programs to help people with disabilities plan for the future, especially considering the general systemic inequity of the financial security of people with disabilities compared to people without disabilities in our country and in our economy right now.
We did do an interview on the channel for anyone who's interested with Amani Barbarin. I definitely recommend checking that out. I'll add a link to it in the description. She is a disability, activist and also content creator. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our tiered recommendations for Phoebe. These are the mild, medium, and spicy methods we personally would use if we were in her situation. Starting off with, once she has this debt paid off in just a couple of months, Phoebe's going to have $700 unaccounted for in her budget each month. What do you think she should start doing with that?
I think that since we're not looking at any kind of immediate debt situation, and I'm leaving a sort of mental blank for talking to a disability expert of things that she might want to build towards, I am in my mind, I'm calling it Project Fun Phoebe, Project Phoebe Fun. Like, is there a way that we can help her decide what's going to be worth it and allow her to spend money on herself? I think a lot of this has to do with self-permission. I think she's been in a place for a long time where she's had to overcorrect. And I think in this situation, it's a matter of building the muscle that allows Phoebe to go, I get to pay for fun. I get to pay for pleasure. She's obviously has a very strong, like, discipline what I have to do muscle. And you have to build out the same muscle in the way of like, how do we get Phoebe to practice paying for pleasure and for fun? Because overall, like, investing in your pleasure is financial self-care. It's an investment in your well-being as well. And so, can we figure out a way to help her stack rank the wants that are going to feel satisfactory? Can we do more to remind her of what great position that she's in terms of the rest of her budget? If we're stack ranking her wants and the things that make her feel good, she could at least just pick the first one or two and then commit to like doing that consistently, so that at least her like, oh, it must be diligent, it must be good brain knows that the stack rank means we're hitting the most effective, fun, pleasure investments at the top without feeling like, oh no, I've like overindulged and, you know, turning on any kind of like guilt or shame trigger.
I also wanted to point out for Phoebe, it's very clear looking at her budget that her values are so strong and her convictions are so strong. Like the biggest line item in her regular, in her discretionary spending, bigger than anything, bigger than even restaurants, like a lot bigger than restaurants, is what she spends on her pets. She also specifically mentioned she spends some time volunteering each month, and she also has a line item for donations. So I think one thing that seems really important to Phoebe is kind of this altruism and taking care of others and being a part of her community. I think one way that she could maybe feel really good about spending on things for herself is like directing it towards small businesses in her community. So going out to local restaurants, going to, if I see she actually spends some money on her hair and makeup stuff, maybe, doing research and investing in some smaller brands that she feels really great about, and like seeing that kind of spending as an extension of her values, I think would speak really well to her.
Yeah. I love that, especially because we keep talking about current administration and things that are going to hit us financially. This week, people are really talking about tariffs and how that's going to affect our groceries, the things that we buy every day. And one piece of advice I keep seeing from folks that I love and follow is like, that means we have to be so much more intentional about where we spend money. So the idea of like, let's invest money in small businesses that feel good. Phoebe's already going in that direction. So I think that's really spot on for her.
Absolutely. Okay. So that's pretty easy. I think, Phoebe's already got the money there to spend a little bit more on herself. So it's really just deciding how she's going to be able to do that. So moving on to our medium tier, what would be your next level recommendation for Phoebe and Project Fund Phoebe?
Project Fund Phoebe, turning up the spice a little bit. Okay. So we know that Phoebe is good at sticking to a budget, right? We know that Phoebe is good at like defining her line items. I wonder what it would feel like if Phoebe built out a minimum fun budget, like spending goal of like, I have to spend this much on my fun. I know that looking at her budget, she does spend, like you said, certain amounts on like self-care and her pets and everything. And I wonder if we can take that stack rank that she created in the mild situation, and then instead of it being like, oh, like this is my budget to spend on this fun thing, but like maybe is there a way that she can flip the script to be like, should I spend on that, to like, I have to spend on this fun budget? Maybe it's something that's outside of what she already considers like hair care and nail care. A lot of folks I know, they're like, that's not fun. That's self-maintenance. That's what I need to make me feel good. This is also where I would ask Phoebe, like, what feels indulgent? Hair and makeup and things like that might not feel indulgent, might just feel like absolute baseline, like I need that to feel good. But what feels like juicy? What feels like, ooh, that was extra, like that was a cupcake, like a lot of sugar, whatever it is means, whatever that like, oh, overindulgence on sugar a little bit might mean for your financial life, making that a minimum spend as opposed to a maximum spend or connecting it to guilt. I think it would be sort of a fun experiment for Phoebe.
Absolutely. And I think in terms of other medium level things that she could do to feel like she's working towards that why is, continuing to work on padding out those long-term savings and fail safes. We did already talk about redirecting her emergency fund contributions to a brokerage account potentially being an option. That doesn't mean taking the money she already has saved and putting it in investments, definitely keeping plenty of it liquid. But after she hits that threshold of whatever she decides she absolutely needs to have in cash, maybe starting to look at other vehicles to potentially help that money, help whatever she's saving grow more in the long run. Another thing she can do, which is unfortunately a lot more expensive than it used to be, is looking at long-term care insurance. Phoebe's done a really good job. She pays for all the insurances she definitely needs. Long-term care tends to fall off people's lists until they start hitting middle-aged and start thinking about their health more. Obviously, Phoebe is already thinking a lot about her health and what her, future is going to look like as a disabled person, I definitely think long-term care insurance is something worth looking into. So we did find a little bit of information on long-term care insurance costs. The average annual premium for a single male is $1,200 and $1,900 for a single female. Sexism. And couples can expect to pay around $2,600 for a combined yearly premium. And that is for long-term care insurance policies purchased at age 60. So obviously it's going to be different for someone in Phoebe's position because she's a lot younger than that. It definitely is worth looking into, especially if that's something she knows that she's probably going to need in the future. And finally, moving on to our spicy level recommendations. What do you have for Project Fund Phoebe here, Berna?
I really hesitate to make Phoebe do more in general because this is a person who has really like went for it, like pedal to the metal in terms of like being super responsible. And now what I want for Project Fund Phoebe is for her to not have fun by herself. I would love it if there was some situation where she could connect with more community. Maybe it's a disability community, maybe it's not, but to really center pleasure. I think in somebody like Phoebe, she has centered responsibility from a really young age because she had to for survival. And I think when we're changing our like foundational habits like this, that's a big ask to do it by yourself in a silo. So can she connect with other folks who also have a similar relationship, a like difficult relationship to pleasure and allowing themselves permission to fun? I'm imagining lots of other folks in the disability community have a similar outlook of like, okay, yeah, we can all talk about fun, but like I have a really different financial future I'm looking towards, and I want to be aware of that. All this advice hits differently and all the support hits differently when it's coming from people who live a similar life as you. And so I'm wondering, is there a situation in which Phoebe finds community? Maybe they include other folks with disabilities and they all have this like mandatory fund budget and they have to spend it together once a month, or they have to like keep track of each other. It's kind of the opposite of when I give people advice of like, if you have a savings goal, you like link up with savings friends and you keep each other accountable to like sticking to your savings. I'm like, can we do that with Phoebe, but keep her accountable to having fun? And specifically from people who understand how it feels to try to have fun when you have so much obligation and responsibility in your life. That would be my spicy wish for Phoebe.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. I think that, we've all been hearing kind of community as a buzzword in recent months because of like how important it is to lean into it. And I think that it can sometimes sound a little trite or not serious, but it's actually like so important to not be living in isolation, especially right now. And I do totally agree that Phoebe's financial priorities should also incorporate some social priorities as well. One thing I did notice is Phoebe's budget doesn't seem to have her freelance income accounted for, as far as I could tell from the docs she sent over. So she does mention bringing in about $5,000 a year in freelance income. I would make sure that's part of her budget. We were talking about this a little bit with Dawn in the last episode, but I definitely think making sure that that kind of income is accounted for. Phoebe might already be, using that for funding like her yearly insurance premiums and whatnot, but I definitely think Project Fund Phoebe could be potentially funded by that freelance income, like giving it a specific task. I think, Berna, you talked about that in one of our other episodes too.
Yeah, it would be great because it sort of employs both sides of, I feel like, Phoebe's brain that she's might be working on, which is the responsibility muscle and the pleasure muscle. I feel like it's very, not that I'm assuming to know who you are, Phoebe, but I feel like it feels very Phoebe that she might be like, oh yeah, freelance income, but since it's freelance, it's not necessarily stable, so I'm not counting it as income. And so that's why it's kind of nice to connect it to the fun budget, like you're saying, because that can fluctuate. She might need, I mean, a 5K a year, that could be split into a couple fun trips or like weekend situations. It could be like put aside for something that feels really indulgent in like a 1 or 2 time or like once a half, a couple times a quarter type of thing. So I love that. I love the idea of like streamlining and like operationalizing the fun part so that it's still familiar to Phoebe without feeling too like, I don't know, Holly and Berna said that I should just go like lose it. So I'm going to go lose it. Like we don't want that. We always want these budget fixes to feel within your grasp and like inside of what feels comfortable to you.
What do disabled people need to think about differently, especially when it comes to financial planning in this current political moment?
So as I mentioned, it can be incredibly difficult to get disability benefits and is also increasingly difficult to maintain disability benefits because of some of the dysfunction that is starting to unravel operations at the Social Security Administration. So people should just keep in mind that if they are on Social Security disability benefits, they can expect it to take longer to get answers from SSA about questions. They can expect situations to arise that might interrupt their benefits. They have to be proactive about keeping all of their personal information updated with the Social Security Administration so they don't accidentally incur an overpayment. Things like that. A lot of people who are beneficiaries are experts by necessity of their own benefits, but I think there's an additional layer of care and proactivity that people need to exercise right now.
That is the end of our last episode, at least for now, of the Budget Fix. Berna, do you have any, final words of wisdom you want to leave everybody with after we've gone through these 3 different budgets?
Sure. I think one thing that I've seen a lot in terms of building financial, here comes the buzzword, community, is that it makes a big difference just to air out the stuff. It makes a difference, I think, for hopefully for folks hearing this, to hear numbers and to see numbers, because we typically keep that really private. And keeping that private is only going to disadvantage us. And so I'm just psyched that something like the Budget Fix exists. One, for nosy B words like me who just want to get up in people's details, but 2, to normalize saying the numbers out loud, giving each other suggestions and advice. And hopefully the Budget Fix starts to feel like conversations or reflecting conversations you're having offline too, with your community, with your friends and family. We should be talking about these things, and you don't have to be an expert to do it. So I hope this has loosened folks up a bit.
Well, thank you so much, Berna. This was so much fun. I totally agree with everything you just said. And where can folks go to find you to make sure they're following all the wonderful work you're putting out there?
Of course. I am loudest and most obnoxious on Instagram at Hey Berna. I'm at Hey Berna on all the different channels. I'm also working real hard as a head of content, community culture at New Dimes. So for anyone who's been like, man, she's on that first gen train and I'm trying to get on there too, first gen wealth building. We are building out a first gen wealth building network at New Dimes. You can follow us new_dimes or newdimes.co. Working on a lot of stuff.
All right. Well, thank you so much again. Thank you everybody for watching. This has been the Budget Fix. I'm TFD Creative Director Holly Trantham, and I will see you elsewhere on the channel. Bye.